We all have things we want to change in our lives, whether it's getting in shape, launching a business, or finally writing a book. And almost universally, our default strategy is to set a massive, intimidating goal. We assume that big results demand huge, exhausting leaps of effort. The problem is, that initial burst of motivation always fades. The sheer size of the task becomes overwhelming, and within a few weeks, we usually find ourselves sliding right back into our old, comfortable routines. Take professional cycling in Great Britain as a case study. For over a century, British riders were remarkably mediocre, winning just a single Olympic gold medal since 1908. That was until they hired Dave Brailsford as their new performance director in 2003. Brailsford took a counterintuitive approach. He completely ignored the massive goal of winning the Tour de France. Instead, he obsessed over a strategy he called the aggregation of marginal gains, searching for tiny 1% improvements in everything the team did. He and his coaches searched for microscopic advantages. They asked riders to wear electrically heated overshorts to maintain perfect muscle temperature. They brought in a surgeon to teach the best hand-washing techniques to avoid colds. They even painted the inside of their transport truck white so they could spot tiny specks of dust that might degrade the finely tuned mechanics. By accumulating hundreds of these minor adjustments, the results arrived incredibly fast. Just 5 years later, at the 2008 Olympic Games in Beijing, the British cycling team dominated the field, capturing a staggering 60% of the available gold medals. It reveals a strange paradox about achievement. Fixating on a grand, sweeping goal often leads to frustration and failure. But obsessing over microscopic, seemingly irrelevant daily processes is what creates a trajectory toward total dominance. These small routines are what author James Clear calls atomic habits. They are tiny, fundamental building blocks of a much larger system. You can think of them as the compound interest of self-improvement. This chart displays the exact mathematical reality of that compounding effect. If you can manage to get just 1% better each day for a single year, that upward exponential curve shows you end up nearly 37 times better by the time you're done. Conversely, looking at the downward line on this graph, if you repeat small errors and get 1% worse each day, those toxic decisions accumulate, slowly dragging your baseline nearly all the way down to zero. This compounding math exposes a major flaw in traditional goal setting: survivorship bias. We tend to look at successful people and assume their ambitious goals drove their achievements. But every Olympian wants to win gold. If winners and losers share the exact same goals, the goal cannot be the thing that drives success. Setting strict goals also creates a yo-yo effect. Many runners train hard for months, but the day they cross the finish line, they stop running. Once the singular milestone is achieved, motivation vanishes and people naturally revert to old behaviors. True long-term progress comes from ignoring the scoreboard and focusing on a continuous cycle of refinement. Because ultimately, you do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. If small daily improvements are mathematically so powerful, we have to ask, why is it so hard to stick with them? Why do most people abandon a new reading habit or workout routine after a few weeks? Imagine you have a frozen ice cube sitting on a table in front of you. The room is cold, currently sitting at 25 degrees. Slowly, the room begins to heat up. 26 degrees, 27, 28. The temperature is shifting, but looking at the ice cube, absolutely nothing happens. Then it hits 32 degrees. The solid ice finally gives way. That single 1-degree shift triggers the transition. The previous temperature increases weren't wasted. Their energy was simply being stored until the environment crossed a critical threshold. This graph maps out a concept called the plateau of latent potential. The straight line represents what we expect to happen. We naturally assume progress will be linear. But the curved line shows how compounding actually works. The most powerful outcomes are always delayed. That gap between what we expect to see and what actually happens creates what's labeled here as the valley of disappointment. People put in weeks of work, see no tangible results, and quit. Surviving this valley without giving up is the only way to eventually unleash the stored potential of your daily habits. So, how do you push through that valley when you can't see any immediate payoff? You have to stop trying to change your outcomes and instead target a much deeper layer of human behavior. We can look at behavior change as the 3 concentric circles shown in this diagram. The outer layer is your outcomes, the specific results you get. The middle layer is your processes, the daily habits you perform. And the deepest layer is identity, the fundamental beliefs and self-image you hold. The reason most habit changes fail is because people work from the outside in. They start at the outer ring by setting an outcome, like I want to be skinny, and use that desire to force a process, like restricting their diet. Real, permanent change requires an inside-out approach. Think of 2 people trying to quit smoking. Offered a cigarette, the first says, I'm trying to quit. That's an outcome-based mindset. The second person simply says, no thanks, I am not a smoker. That is an identity shift. Any behavior that conflicts with your internal self-image will not last. You might want to save money, but if your internal self-image is that of a spender, you will eventually sabotage your own plans. Ultimately, an atomic habit is a daily vote for the person you wish to become. Letting go of massive goals allows you to prove a new identity to yourself, one small win at a time.